Hello everyone and welcome back to chapter 15, The Day Before Christmas. Jack admired himself in the full-length mirror in Sally's sewing workshop. The long white beard she'd made of spider silk gave him dashing, thoughtful air. The red suit fit his narrow bones like a glove, and the white trim at the neck and sleeves was perfect down to the last stitch. "You don't look like yourself, Jack. Not at all," Sally muttered as she sewed a bit more trim into his sleeve. "Isn't that wonderful?" Jack turned back to give up to the mirror to admire the white trim at the collar. "It couldn't be more wonderful." "But you're the Pumpkin King." Sally unhooked his portrait from the wall and pulled back the wax paper to show Jack as she knew him best, in his black striped suit with his dashing bat bow tie. He took the portrait from her and promptly snapped it in half over his knee. He tossed the pieces onto the floor dramatically. "Not anymore. And I feel so much better now." Sally rumbled uneasily as she finished stitching his left sleeves trim. "Jack, you think something's missing." "Oh, Jack, I know you think something's missing." Sally was too distracted by the memory of her vision that she jabbed the needle into his finger bone. "Ow." On instinct, he popped the hurt finger into his mouth. "I'm sorry." "Oh, sorry. Sorry," she offered. Jack remembered that as a skeleton he felt no pain and took the finger out of his mouth. He admired himself again in the mirror. "You're right, something is missing, but what?" "I've got the beard, the coat, the boots." Jack. The mirror reflected something outside of the sewing workshop that stole his attention. Before Sally could stop him, he ran out into the town square where monsters loaded packages into the sleigh they made out of a coffin and a barrel. The skeletal reindeer, draped in festive garlands, danced over the wooden boards of the elevated ramp, eager to take flight. Lock, Shock, and Barrel paraded into town square, sitting atop an enthusiastic bundle tied up in their walking tub. "This time we bagged him," the three exclaimed. Locke jumped off the bag and skipped back to Jack. "This time we really did." "He sure is big, Jack," Barrel said, patting the sack beneath him. "And heavy," Shock insisted. She and Locke pulled the rope to open the bag. Immediately, the white bearded man in a red suit struggled free. "Let me out," he demanded in a huff. Gasps filled the air as monsters laid eyes on the fearsome king of Christmastown, the terrifying Santa Claus in the flesh. Jack was the only one who didn't cower before him. He turned on his undead charm as he approached the bearded man. "Santa Claus in person." What a pleasure to meet you. He thrusted out his skeletal hand and clenched Sandy Claus's black glove. One. He gasped in astonishment as he examined the man's petite, whatever, delicate digits. Why, you have hands, you don't have claws at all. Santa Claus paused in Red's stocking cap back. Santa Claus pushed his red stocking cap back over his aching head after he had spent so long cramped up in the black bag. It took his eyes a minute to adjust. He looked around in a daze. What the, what was this awful place? These monsters, these dread, drab, gray skies, these angular buildings that grinned ghoulish like they were alive. Where am I? He asked, still out of sorts. Beaming, Jack linked into until he was just a few inches from Santa Claus's face. Surprised, aren't you? He swept his hand back to show off his town. I knew you would be. You don't need to have another worry about Christmas this year. Santa Claus still felt like he must be trapped in a nightmare. Sticky candy from those three naughty trick-or-treaters were caught in his beard, making a mess of everything. He blinked, considering Jack's words. What? Jack reassured, resting his hand on Sandy's back. Consider this a vacation, Sandy. A reward. It's your turn to take it easy. He plucked a candy from Santa Claus's beard. But there must be some mistake, Sandy sputtered. Seeing that he's uncomfortable, Jack commanded lock, shock, and barrel. Gleefully, the masked children pounced on Santa Claus and wrestled him back into the Halloween bag. Just a second, fellas, Jack ordered when Santa Claus was halfway back into the bag. Jack leaned in close, stroking his chin and examining Santa Claus. Of course, that's what I'm missing. He snatched the red cap off Sandy's head and placed it on his own. Thanks. Sally protested, but you can't just... His voice dimmed as the trick-or-treaters crammed him back into the bag and retied the rope. The clawfoot tub stretched its porcelain limbs, then started the long walk out of town. Hold on, Sally's muffled voice came out from inside the bag. Where are we going now? Oogie Boogie's gang snickered as they rode atop him. Once Santa Claus had departed for his restful retreat, Jack stroked the hat. Ho, 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 he attempted in a flat voice, then stroked his head. No, it doesn't sound right at all. He tried again, deeper this time. Ho, ho, ho. Sally, wringing her hands, watching outside of her sewing machine. This is much worse than I thought. Much worse. She pressed her hands to her face, kidnapping Santa Claus. He was in incredible danger with those naughty little children. They'd take him straight to Oogie Boogie's lair. She knew it. Why was Jack letting this happen? Didn't he know better? This whole Christmas thing had simply gone too far. Jack practiced a higher pitched ho ho ho, then shook his head again, still not perfect. I know. Sally grabbed her cloth bag and ran off. Oh, yeah, ran out of the sewing workshop, then moved quietly through the streets, through everyone was still busy packing presents in the coffin sleigh to notice the rag doll made her way to Dr. Finkelstein's castle. The castle was the single place in Halloween Town Sally dreaded most, but try as she might, she couldn't shake this terrible premonition that something awful would come from Jack's obsession with Christmas. Jack wasn't listening to her, and the other town's residents were all too dizzily, dazzled by his plans to listen either, so she simply had to take matters into her own hands. She had learned that Dr. Finkelstein kept a key to the castle's front door hidden beneath a little stone gargoyle in the garden. For such a brilliant man, he could be surprisingly forgetful, especially when it came to trivial like remembering to take his keys with him when he left. A cold feeling overcame her as she tiptoed along the outside of the castle. She needed to get inside to stop Jack's plans, but what if she was caught? Would the doctor lock her in her cell again? Would he rip open her seams and scatter her stuffing in the cemetery? Fortunately, her soft cotton boots barely made a creak as she unlocked the front door and climbed the castle's ramp. Higher on other floors, she saw wines to life. Sally relaxed. Dr. Finkelstein must be working in his laboratory. When she was there, he tended to become so engrossed in his experiments that the castle could catch on fire and burn around him, and he'd barely notice. She turned right at the top of the ramp and tiptoed to her old cell. Then she quietly lowered to her hands and knees and used an old spoon to pry open the loose floorboard beneath her cot, where she had hidden some of the most potent poisons she concocted from the herbs from her cemetery garden. She lifted out a jar of frog's breath and nodded to herself. This'll stop Jack. She was windingly louder from the laboratory. They saw world louder from the laboratory. Sally quickly replaced the floorboards. She knew it wasn't safe to hurry down the ramp and get out of the castle before her curiosity got the better of her. What experiment was the doctor working on now? She'd overheard the monsters in town whispering about Dr. Finkelstein's bold new project, but had no idea what it was. Hanging the jar of frog's breath, she tiptoed to the open laboratory door and carefully peeked inside. Dr. Finkelstein was leaning over a new creation strapped down on the operation table. Sally could make out little more than a ca- cadaver's bandaged skull. Never heard that word before. What a joy to think all will have in common, the doctor purred to the bandaged cadaver. He lifted his skull cap prudently around and then tore out a large chunk of his brain matter and inserted it into the creation's empty skull. We'll have conversations worth having. Sally fought the urge to roll her eyes. That silly old doctor of conversation had been lacking in the past. It hadn't been Sally's fault. All Dr. Finkelstein ever wanted to talk about was electricity conductors. He placed his hands on each side of the skull and adjusted its head to fit just right on the neck joints. Now then, Sally watched partly in horror and partly in disgust as the doctor leered towards his undead companion on the operating table, his lips pressed to perched to press a cold kiss on her new brain. But as soon as he did, the cadaver's skull cap crashed down on the doctor's lips with a smash. He let out a whine. Sally pressed her hand over her mouth, soothing her laughter, but for both their sakes, she hoped the doctor's new companion would be a better fit for him than she had been. She certainly had no intentions of returning to servitude. She tiptoed out the castle, replaced the key beneath the gargoyle, and headed into town square, determined to stop Jack. That is the end of chapter 15. I do hope to see all of you in the next chapter. Goodbye.